Hi everyone, this is my November reading wrap up. It's perfect to end the first official sort of cold winter month with a cold. So I apologise that I look pasty, pale, but also like red. I've literally just I'm topping up concealer as I go in this video because my nose is so red and I'm sniffy and I can't stop sneezing. But anyway, we're going to talk about all the books I read this month. Last month I read 33. Okay, but that was crazy. That was my biggest month of the year. I'm not beating that and I'm not trying to beat that, okay? October was just a cozy month and I couldn't stop reading. November has also been cozy, but I had a few big life changes this month, and in some ways that's made me read more to distract myself, and in some ways that's made me read less because in some ways I've actually been busier. It's kind of weird. So I think I've read 17 in total. I'm just going to count as I go, to be honest. I started the month off with Keeping 13. This is the sequel to Binding 13. The whole Boys of Tommen series is, I think it's 5 books at the minute, and the first 2 books are Binding 13 and Keeping 13. So this is the last book of Shannon and Johnny, this one couple, and then the books after this are on different couples. Am I going to read those? Yes, at some point, but I'm not like dying to pick them up, you know, like I will at some point. But these books, first off, this is 800 pages. It's a romance and it's 800 pages, okay? That tells you how deep these books are. These are deep emotional journeys, and these first 2 books were so intense that I just couldn't I can't handle reading the rest of the series yet, okay? I need to be in a very, very good emotional place to read it. This book was better than the first one. This book I gave 4.75 stars. The only reason I didn't give it 5 stars is because for 5 stars, I need the book to feel like it stayed with me. As much as it kind of has, in a way, it's also not. It didn't give me a book hangover, anything like that. But I think that's just because romance isn't my favourite genre anyway, so it's probably why. If it had a fantasy element, I don't know, probably would have had a worse hangover. This was even more emotional than the first book. I talked about the first book in my last wrap up because I read that before. They're very dark because the female main character has a very horrible home life and it's intense. And the first book ended on a cliffhanger where she essentially, you wonder if she's going to live or die. Now I knew there was a whole 800 page second book, so I knew she was going to live, but it was still stressful, and that's why I then ran to pick this one up. This is the most heartbreaking book I've ever read so far, I'd argue. I mean, I have read a lot of books in my life, so I might be missing some, but it's up there at least in the top 5 of the most heartbreaking books I've ever read. It's hard to talk about it without spoiling it, but if you've read it, you'll get what I mean. Like, I sobbed my heart out at this. There's a huge scene in this where essentially some people die. Let's leave it at that. And I absolutely sobbed my heart out reading that scene. And I don't cry at books. Like, I get emotionally attached to characters, but for some reason I just don't cry. I feel shit, I feel sad, but I don't cry. And I cry at everything, so I don't know why that works. But rarely does a book make me cry, which is why I was tempted to give it 5 stars, but I just can't. It's just the way, there's something about it that I will go into that I don't like. But essentially, to wrap it up, basically, this book was, yes, better than the first one because I think the characters had more development. The characters felt older. In the first book, the characters were extremely annoying, especially the female main character. She was absolutely, I know she was supposed to be young, but it was painful. I also had to age up the characters in my head. Can I just add that? It ended well. It ended perfectly for the couple. I was happy for it to end that way for them. In terms of general sort of high school romance, definitely the best one I've read. Plot was a lot better in this one. I thought development was a lot better. However, what I will say with the whole series so far, this book and the one before it, is they are too long, okay? I appreciate that there is a lot of character development and a lot happening, but there was so many sentences and paragraphs and even whole chapters where I was like, this is interesting, but it's not needed. Like, it felt like a fan fiction, and a way that Chloe Walsh writes is good in the sense that she's really good at, because it's in first person, 2 POVs, it's really good. She's really good at capturing the person's feelings and emotions, okay? So like having like short sentences to be like saying they are worried or whatever. However, it does feel like it's written very fan fiction-y. So if you hate this series, I don't blame you. Like, the writing, I'll be honest, isn't actually that great, essentially. It feels very AO3, feels very fan fiction-y. However, I feel like I can look past that because it was captivating because of how much I fell for the characters. And I say this a lot about books where I'll often say the writing isn't actually very good, but there's something about the way they tell the story and the way they build the characters that makes me not want to put it down. And that's exactly the case for this book. Then I read the Caraval series. So I read this for the first time in about 2020 when I first joined sort of booktok and became obsessed with fantasy in particular. This is a YA fantasy. It's not actually got that much fantasy in it. I read Once Upon a Broken Heart early in the year and I loved that series, but I completely forgot who Jax was. He's the main character in Once Upon a Broken Heart, and then he's also in this one. So it was quite funny to read this after reading Once Upon a Broken Heart again and being like, oh, weird, because obviously Jax in this series is horrible. I hate him, but I loved him in the other one. Anyway, this is quite easy to sum up. I think Stephanie Garber is a good writer. I think she's a good YA writer. I think these are very, very YA. And I think that's why I loved it in 2020. I really, really loved them in 2020 because I was like 4 or 5 years younger. I was barely an adult. In fact, I probably wasn't even actually officially an adult when I read these. Now, at 23, it just didn't hit the same. They weren't bad. I didn't dislike them as such. I just couldn't get into them as much. I mean, the first book I actually really, really loved and I actually really could enjoy a lot. And the plot for this one I really, really enjoyed. When you get to the second one, it's more around the main character's sister and I just couldn't really take a liking to her. And I didn't really care about her storyline. And then the third one, I don't know, I was so bored. I didn't care about it being wrapped up. So I'd say the first book I actually did really, really love. I really enjoyed. And I'm definitely glad I reread the series because I wanted to reread it because I hadn't read it in so long and I'd forgotten what had happened and I wanted to see if I still liked it. But will I be reading it a third time? I don't think so. But if you like a YA fantasy, you will like it. I just feel like with YA now, I'm very specific with what I like because I'm not really a YA. I'm a new adult person now. That's the age group that I'm in. So it feels funny with certain YA. It feels almost teen. And I think this felt a bit more teen. Then I read Phantasma on my Kindle. How cute is my Kindle case? This book, I'm tempted to say it was 5 stars. I think I gave it 4.5, 4.75 stars at the time, but I'm thinking looking back now, I think it's 5 stars because I have had a book hangover from this book. And this, I do think it was written well. There were some things that weren't written as well, but I think overall it was well written and I like that basically the action kind of starts straight away. You know, you get straight into it. Within the first 50 pages, she's pretty much already at these games. So Phantasma is basically, it's like Hunger Games mixed with ghosts. They have these different trials to do that she has to get through so that she can win this money because her mum has died and her house is essentially, they can't afford to live there, right? So she needs to do these trials to win this money. And this phantom helps her and he's the male main character. And there's loads of other different phantoms, there's different types of ghosts and ghouls and they all have different names. I can't remember all of that exactly right. But I just remember really loving Ophelia, the main character, loving the male main character. He really grew on me. I didn't at first, but he really grew on me. And just loving the trials. This is the one thing I'd say about this, and I said this in my TikTok review of this book. The trials were my favourite trials ever. Like, I've read a lot of trials books recently, which you will see as I talk about them. This was my favourite book that I've read so far, obviously other than Hunger Games. Like, obviously. That had the best games and trials in it. Like, each trial was based off of one of the 7 deadly sins and the description of the trials was so much more fun. Whether I found with a lot of books recently that I've read with trials and games in and blah blah blah, they almost don't really describe the games or trials at all. They sort of just talk about them going through a woods or something, and like, it's not a proper game. Whether these had like proper games they had to do, like she had to, for example, go across this chessboard while there was a swinging thing above everyone that was killing people. Like, the description of the actual games was super fun, and I am such a romantasy girly. Like, more normally when I read romantasy, I'm like, I want the romance subplot, you know, with a bit of fantasy added in. But this was like, no, I actually just wanted the actual, what she was doing. And so it was really, really enjoyable. I really loved it. There was something about it that was so captivating. I think it was because I loved the trials. I think it's because I liked all of the characters. The ghosts and ghouls idea was really fun. She has a second book coming out next year, and yes, it will be on my list, okay? It's on my TBR very excited to read the next one. Then I read Ashes and the Starcoast King. I read this is the second book in the Crowns of Nyxia series. Finally got round to it. I should have read it really right after Serpent and the Wings of Night. But for some reason it just wasn't that high on my priority list, and I thought, screw it, I finished Phantasma, I'm going to read that on my Kindle. This book I preferred, actually, to the first book. I preferred this book to Serpent and the Wings of Night. And I can't quite pinpoint why. I think it's because I liked the dynamic between the two main characters. It's sort of like they were enemies to lovers and then enemies, and that's how the second book began. And I really thought it was a really good slow burn of them becoming lovers again, essentially. I know that might be a spoiler, I don't know, but I feel like you can kind of assume that's going to happen. These are sort of, the Crimes of Nyxia series is going to be a long series, and the first two books, Serpent and Wings of Night and this one, focus on this couple, Rain and Araya. I've genuinely forgotten. And then the third book, which I didn't read this month but I want to read soon, is focusing on Misha, who is my favourite character in the whole series. I prefer her to the female main character. Very excited for that one, but anyway, we didn't get that to that this month. But so this book was sort of rounding it all up, and I love the way it ended for that couple. I think it ended in a really good way for that couple. It didn't feel like they were forced. You knew that it was going to end with them being together and happy again. You just knew it. Like, maybe not the world being happy, but them two as a couple. Because you know it's the last one in the duology, like, I just could tell, like, you know. But the way it was done was still really, really good and really at a great pace, and it made a lot of sense. And again, the side characters, Misha, for example, had great scenes. And the way it was written was just so captivating. I don't know what exactly it was that made it better than the first one. I think it was just how captivating it was, and there was a bit less world building because there was a novella that I read that gave some context, and the first book had a lot of world building, so they didn't need it as much in this one. So that might be why I like this one more. But yeah, this one was honestly like 4.5 stars. Only reason it wasn't 5 is because I didn't get that hangover, didn't, think about it for ages afterwards. Speaking of series, I read Sky Shade. This came out at the beginning of November. I think I literally read it on the day that it came out. This is the third book in the Lightlark series. I think I talked about these two in my last wrap-up. Well, I must have. But basically, the first book of Lightlark, amazing. Essentially, again, another Hunger Games rip-off, basically. With more trials, and I really enjoyed it. And there was a love triangle, and I haven't read a love triangle read in a long time, where there's actually two love interests, and both have their flaws, but both are good. Like, you could root for both of them. Like, if you are an Oro girl, cool. If you're a Grim girl, cool. I'm kind of neither. I was Grim in the first book, and now I just don't really care about either of them. This is my problem. The first book was amazing. Second book was meh. Like, it was a lot of talking, not a lot of doing. It felt like nothing actually happened in the plot, and I was just disappointed. But I'd already pre-ordered the third one, so tough. When I ordered this, I was expecting this to be the final book, because that's what everyone had said it would be. That's what the author had said it would be. And then as soon as it was released, she said that actually she's writing 2 more books. Now, I don't want to get too into this, but to me, let's just say I won't be reading any more books in this series. And there's many reasons, one of them being that I just genuinely didn't like the second book, and then I didn't really like this one either, to be honest. I feel like it didn't get any better. I was expecting it to get better. And I did also go into it expecting it to tie everything together, expecting her to end up with at least one of the men. But no, because she announced suddenly that she was doing 2 more books. If she'd said she was doing 2 more books before the release date of this, I would never have pre-ordered it, to be honest. It just feels like, I don't want to say a cash grab, because that feels harsh. That doesn't feel very nice to say. But it doesn't feel genuine. It doesn't feel like those next 2 books would fit the series. I feel like she's definitely trying to find things to add. This could have tied up the whole series. There was enough loopholes and plots and stuff that could have just been tied up in this book, and she could have just ended it with one of them. A lot of rubbish was added that just wasn't needed. And I could not care less about the next 2 books. What I think she should have done is finish this series as a trilogy, or even as a duology, to be honest, because even the second book was a lot of filler. And then just do a new series. Like, if she wanted the money, or more, or just to write more books, in general, maybe it's not that, vain a goal. Maybe she just wanted to write more. I think write a new series, or write a spin-off, or write a novella or something, but like, 2 whole new, a 5-book series is not needed for this, okay? Yeah, I don't want to go too deeply into it. I think this was like 2 stars for me. The way it is written, I kind of like. I do quite like her writing. Like, it makes me interested in it. But yeah, the plot was just not there. It felt like she's basically reaching at this point to add extra stuff and make it more confusing. And I don't know. I know fantasy is fantasy, so you can kind of say anything. You kind of do anything because it's a made-up world. It's made-up stuff happening. It's magic happening. But I still think it needs to be somewhat realistic in the sense of it just gets a bit stupid when you're just constantly adding things that just don't make any sense. Anyway, quickly, I read the Uses of Enchantment, which is a non-fiction book. I don't often read non-fiction books, not because I don't like them. I love a non-fiction book because I tend to read it in like one sitting. I don't know what it is with non-fiction. I read it even quicker than I read fiction. I think it's because normally, obviously, like I'm on my phone, for example, reading articles pretty much every day. So I'm naturally quicker than, you know, when I'm reading a non-fiction book, it feels like I'm just reading an article and I can read it in like 5 minutes. I don't know, not the whole book in 5 minutes, you know what I mean? But then I find that I don't really like buying non-fiction books because I feel like, well, I can just research that online now, you know? Like, that sounds very Gen Z of me, but it's true. Like, if I want, I could read a whole book about the ancient wonders of the world, but one, I studied it at college anyway, but also like I could just literally look at that online and find loads of sources about each of those. So I sort of don't buy non-fiction often. It's more of as a treat because obviously they are fairly expensive. But my dad bought me this one. This one is basically talking about fairy tales and their meanings, okay? And I thought this was going to sort of go into, yes, like where fairy tales originate from, for example, where did Little Red Riding Hood originate from, what is the meaning behind it, what are psychological meanings, blah, 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 all the deepness behind it. I'm really interested in that, really like the idea of that. It kind of went more into child psychology, like how does that fairy tale have an effect on a child, which just didn't interest me as much. Because I did psychology at A-level and it kind of gave me like some trauma thinking back to doing that. It felt like I was at school again. But the concept of the book I did like, and it was written quite, it was quite an old book that I didn't really realise, but it was fun to read. So, you know, it was a 3-star read. I mean, with a non-fiction book, I think it's hard to rate them because it's just like essentially like reading an article. But it was interesting, it was written well, and it definitely had a lot of sources and it was very interesting. So, yeah. Then I read the Book of Azrael. Ugh. I wanted so badly to like this. I just couldn't. I couldn't get into it. I ended up DNFing this one, so this is like a solid 1 star, if that. At first, I liked it. My main issue was that the male main character, even though it was dual POV, which normally means I love the male main character, because when I can see into a man's psyche, I can actually understand him, which is fucking hard to do, you know what I mean, in normal life. And that makes me obviously like them more, because I can see, especially if it's like enemies to lovers and you've got a dual POV, perfect, because then it's like I don't actually see them as the enemy, whereas sometimes when you've got enemies to lovers, I just hate the man. Like, he's just too much of an enemy, you know? And if anything, the woman was really the enemy in this one, which was interesting, but I didn't find any chemistry or connection between the two main characters. The urban fantasy setting was a bit odd. It felt very, very old fantasy style. Like, it felt like it shouldn't have been set in an urban world, you know? Like, it just didn't feel right. It felt too old and old-fashioned. It felt like it should be set in, yeah, some sort of old civilization. And I just couldn't gel with it. The writing wasn't necessarily bad. This is my thing. The writing was not bad. It was actually fairly good. It's almost the opposite to the thing I was talking about earlier. The storytelling was so bad, okay? Because the world building was intense and long, and I didn't understand any of it. And I didn't care about the characters, especially the female main character. I really disliked her. She wasn't very nice, she wasn't very funny, she didn't have much charisma, she didn't have any talent, she didn't have any redeemable qualities about her whatsoever, really. So, yeah, I don't really have anything nice to say, which feels really harsh. The nice thing to say is that the writing was not bad. The writing was fine. It's not that she's a bad writer at all. Like, if I spoke to her, I'd actually love to speak to her because I'm sure she's an amazing author. It is just that particular book, the structure of it, I think, and the characters weren't strong enough for me to keep going. So I ended up giving up because I got 300 pages in and I thought, I actually don't care what happens. Like, if I'm halfway through a book and I think, I could put this down right now and never think about it again and not care about what happens, then that's a sign that's probably bad. You know, I should probably DNF it. So I did. I instead read The Crimson Moth. This is The Heartless Hunter. It's the same book, but in England, for some reason, it's The Crimson Moth. Okay, don't ask me why. This book is gorge. I love it. Second of all, I love the book. Okay, we actually have a good one. I feel like the last few books have not been great, but I've actually got a good one now. This was a 4.5 star read for me, okay? It's fairly short, actually. It's only like, well, this is a hardback, to be fair, so it's going to be a bit shorter, but it's like less than 400 pages, like 300 pages. This Enemies to Lovers just ate, okay? For a pretty short book, it was a good Enemies to Lovers, because with Enemies to Lovers, I like a slow burn, you know, but this was well paced. The characters were well written. I really liked the male main character and the female main character, and I liked all the side characters as well. There was a great twist at the end, sort of revealing that someone wasn't who they said they were portraying themselves to be, that I was not expecting, and I really, really enjoyed it. Kind of gagging for the next book, which comes out next February, so at least it's not that long to wait. I really enjoyed the writing, the pace. It was easy to read. The world building was fairly simple. It's essentially a witch and a witch hunter, so it's quite an easy plot line. Like, she's obviously trying to not show to him that she is a witch, and he is obviously trying to work out if she is this witch who is saving other witches. Basically, he's been tasked to kill this witch, the Crimson Moth, that is saving other witches, which she obviously is. And she's trying to pretend she's not it. And it's quite a fun little game throughout the book of them doing tasks to work out if they can catch the other one out. For example, he will tell her some confidential information that's not true, and then there will be a sudden attack on this one place, and then he'll kind of know that it might be her, but things will go slightly wrong, so then he's not sure if it's her, and blah blah blah. And it's just very well done, the games that they play throughout it, and it's very believable. And I felt like they had a lot of chemistry. It really, really worked. And at the end, it was amazing. But I'm just praying that in the second book, they become lovers again. They need to, okay? Then we have The Grandest Game. This has been on my TBR for too long, okay? So this is the first book in the spin-off series of The Inheritance Game. So The Inheritance Game series is a series by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. Amazing series, one of my favourite series ever. My favourite probably YA series that isn't a fantasy. It's kind of just more of a YA mystery. Loved that series, so I was excited for this one. I actually didn't realise that this was a spin-off until like a while after I'd ordered it. And I think that's my problem with this book. I want to preface this by saying that I'm about to give this a low rating. I'm about to rate this about 2 stars, 1.5 stars. Why am I rating it? Because personally, I didn't like it. The writing was amazing. Jennifer Lynn Barnes' writing in the other books were insane, and she did not get any worse in this book. This was still amazing writing. It was very well done. The plot worked. The mysteries worked, okay? My only issue is that there was about 4 different POVs in this book, and with completely new characters. But they're essentially completely new characters. It's only like 300 pages long. It's really not that long at all. And there's like 4 POVs of all these different characters. So I couldn't connect to any of them. I couldn't care about any of them because I didn't learn enough about them in time. They all had they were all doing these games. And it was just showing you each of them doing their different things in their teams. But I just didn't care. Like, I didn't care, but I didn't connect to any of them. And I don't think that that's a Jennifer Lynn Barnes problem. I think this book was good. I just think it's a me problem, and that I loved the Inheritance Game series so much, and I was so in love with the characters and attached to the characters, that when I realised they weren't in it, I kind of already was on the back foot. You know, I kind of already disliked it. And I just wasn't in the mood to learn about completely new characters. There is another final book in the Inheritance Game series that has just come out that is a set of basically short stories about the original characters. I should have bought that instead, and I probably will still be buying that. This is a new spin-off series she's doing. I won't be buying any more from it. But that's honestly not her problem. It's my problem. It's because I just could not gel with the characters or care enough about them, and I think it was an issue with the POVs. I think that was the main thing. There was sort of a girl that felt like the main one, Lara, and she kind of teamed up with this brother that was in the original series. But even then, I didn't care about her story. I couldn't connect to it, and I didn't really like any of the characters. A lot of them didn't have very redeemable features or qualities, which I guess is maybe the point, but I don't know. So I'm very much giving that a low rating, but with the context of saying that it's my personal preference. I didn't really want to read a new book about completely new characters and these new games. And I just didn't realise that when I bought it, and I needed to read it because it was on my shelf, so it needed to be done. But that was me being silly when I ordered it, basically. Then on Kindle, I read Metal Slinger. Oh my word, okay. I'm gonna sum this up quickly because I talked about it a lot in the vlog in which I read it. Check out my 2 recent vlogs if you want to see me reading all of these books. Everyone talked about Metal Slinger because everyone said that the plot twist at the end, the last couple chapters, was crazy, and it ends on a cliffhanger, there's a huge plot twist, and you're like, what the fuck, and it messes with your head. That's why I bought this book. That's why, well, I say bought, it was on Kindle, but that's why a lot of people have been talking about this book, and that's why I got it, okay? So I went into this knowing that there was a big plot twist at the end. And I have 2 things to say about that. One being, I think I enjoyed the book more because I knew. Because I was reading the book thinking, oh my gosh, okay, right, what's going to happen? Trying to work out sort of, you know, subconsciously, like, can I work out what the plot twist is? I kind of did and kind of didn't. I think I would have enjoyed it less if I didn't know that, because the whole time I'm reading it, I'm going, okay, this is good. Right, what's happening? What's happening next? I need to get to, you know, I'm excited to keep reading it because I want to work out what's happening. The actual plot itself, though, was a lot of talking. And essentially these 2 main characters, a female main character and a male main character, essentially just travelling and chatting and surviving through this land, and a lot of world building and dialogue to go with it. So I imagine, I don't know for sure, I obviously can never know, but I imagine if I didn't know there was a plot twist at the end, I might have been a bit like, okay, when is something going to happen, you know? But I didn't mind that not much was happening because I was kind of waiting for the build up, right? Overall, I did like the writing, I did like the pacing. It was fairly quick. It was a bit slow in the first couple chapters, but then as soon as like the female main character sort of left her original home, it started to get really good. It's really hard to explain the plot without spoiling it, so I'm trying my hardest. Let's just talk about the actual plot twist, because let's be real, that was the best part of the book, definitely. I did enjoy the actual book without, I say before the plot twist, it was probably a 4-star read. I still enjoyed reading it all up until then, and then the plot twist made it 5 stars for me because it gave me a book hangover. It made me gasp. It made me have a reaction, which most books, like I said before about crying, don't. Like, I've read a lot of books and not a lot of things surprises me now. Now, I obviously knew there was going to be a plot twist. Did I guess the plot twist? No, I talked about it in my vlog. In my vlog, I sort of said how there's only a few things that a plot twist can really be, and it's normally a betrayal of some kind. It's normally that someone turns out to not be who they said they were, or someone is lying about something to someone. That tends to be, quite loosely, what the plot twist is, because I can't really think of many other loose plot twists like that. And I guessed that. It was one of those, you know? So I loosely guessed that that's what the plot twist was going to be. However, I didn't guess the exact intricacies within it, which was what exactly this person was doing. I did think that the person who turned out to not be who they said they were, I did think it would be them. Because what I will say when I read the book is I didn't trust anyone, even though I knew there was a plot twist, yes, but I think even if I didn't know, I didn't trust anyone. I didn't trust the female main character, I didn't trust her narrative, and I didn't trust the male main character. He got very angry very quickly at things, and I couldn't work out if he was justified in that or not, which made me distrust both of them. And that's all I'm going to say about it. Now, was the plot twist actually good? It was and it wasn't. It was good, and I've given it 5 stars because to me it was a good plot twist because it made me go, oh, okay. I kind of suspected something like that was going to happen. I did kind of suspect it, I'm not going to lie. However, I was still surprised, and that's how you know that it's a good plot twist. I was still shocked when it actually came true because there was nothing in the text to suggest that at all. Like, you couldn't have guessed that exact thing if you'd been reading it, especially if you didn't know there was a plot twist. Like, you couldn't have worked it out, right? There were no hints. So I think that's why it kind of stuck with me at the book hangover, because I was shocked because I had suspicions, but none of them were being confirmed. So I just assumed I was wrong and whatever. Anyway, what I will say though, is it didn't make a lot of sense. There's a lot of questions about how the hell that person pulled that off, you know, and how the hell that worked. There's a lot of questions that I have that were unanswered and didn't really make sense, and a lot of plot holes that just didn't make sense. but I have to just assume that they're going to be tied up in the second book. I mean, she's still writing the second book, so that is painful. It's going to be well over a year before the next one. Oh my god, I'm going to scream. So I've been trying to not just think about this book now, like ever since I've read it. But yeah, I kind of just have to trust her that it's gonna make sense, you know. It's hard. Then I read Kingdom of the Wicked. This has been on my physical TBR for a while. This is the book that my Instagram followers chose for me in my Instagram followers choose my TBR video. I finally got around to reading it. This is essentially a fantasy murder mystery. Basically, this main character's sister dies, and she needs to work out who killed her and what happened. Now, what I will say is good about this book is you do find out who kills her, you do find out what happens to her, so that's good, okay? Because I was like, if I go through this whole book and I still don't know what happens and I have to buy the next one and the rest of the series to find out, I'm going to scream, okay? Because that's the minimum that I want. This book just didn't hit for me, okay? And I can see, this is a sort of book where it's like I can see why you'd love it, and I can see why you'd also not like it like me. I couldn't connect to the characters. I didn't like the female main character. One, I found her annoying and just and I think that the relationship between the main character and her sister who died, I think it would have actually been better if there was a bit of extra filler showing their relationship, showing their closeness. Whether I feel like the sister suddenly died in like chapter 2, and then there was a lot of obviously the sister grieving, which makes obviously a lot of sense, and I'm glad she did have that in there. But I just think it would have been more emotionally, I would have been more emotionally connected if she added some sort of, I don't know, emotional scene between the two sisters, showing their closeness, whether it was kind of like, you know, it just wasn't as powerful as it could have been. It still was still very upsetting, but, you know, I just think it could have been a bit stronger, that's all. And she teams up with this Prince of Hell. You know, there's like these different princes of hell that are all the 7 deadly sins. So this one is wrath, and then she meets envy, and she meets these other ones, and the concept I really enjoyed, and the fact that it's kind of based on like Italian roots I really enjoyed. However, half of it was talking about food for like no reason, just talking about food. I don't know why. And again, I didn't care about the characters. I didn't like the male main character. He was not redeemable in any way. He was not attractive in any way either, so there was just nothing good about him. And like I said, the female main character I just didn't care about. However, this wasn't written badly in any way. Again, she's not a bad writer. This is not a bad book. It's just that I couldn't connect to it, and I didn't really care about the outcome. And even when we did find out who did the murder, I was a bit like, okay. I wasn't shocked. I wasn't interested. I was like, okay, cool. On to the next book, you know. She does have other series, one of them being Throne of the Fallen, and I know a lot of people say how that one is better and they love that one, and that one is on my TBR, and it's still going to stay on my TBR. I'm not going to not read anything by Kerri Maniscalco now. I'm still going to read her other series because I didn't dislike her writing. It's just, you know, the characters in this one just weren't it for me, so I'm still going to try her other. Then on my Kindle I read Dance with the Fae Prince. This is the second book in the Elise Cover Married to Magic series. This is a selection of books based on fairy tales with different fantasy elements. For example, the first one was Deal with the Elf King, that obviously had elves in it, and this one obviously had a fae in it. They're kind of standalone in that they're in the same world, all of them, but you can kind of read them in any order, or like you can dip in and out. So that's why I picked up the second one. I read the first one a few months ago. I picked up the second one because I feel like they're quite short, they're quite easy standalone fantasy reads, fantasy romances that you can dip in and out of, and I think are good to sort of cleanse a palate. And after Kingdom of the Wicked and the Grandest Game and then the intensity of Metal Slinger, I was like, I need an easy romantasy right now because my head hurts. Definitely did that. I mean, look, I will never give these books more than 4 stars because then they're not exactly amazing, like they're not really well fleshed out, but they're good for a palate cleanser. They're good as a simple romantasy. I think these are really good books if you like romance and want some fantasy added rather than the opposite. I think if you love fantasy and you don't care that much about romance, you won't like these books, the series. But if you just like romance and just want a little extra fantasy element, you will like these. Like 3 stars, I think I preferred the first book. I just found it a bit more, I connected to the male main character a little bit more, and I preferred the female main character a lot more. In this one, she felt very young and naive, which I understand why she was, but it was just hard at times. She felt like a child in some of the things she said and did. Was it the best book in the world? No. Was it the best book I read this month? Definitely not. But it was a fun, light-hearted, easy romantasy read So what can I say? There was nothing bad about it at all. I read The Last Kingdom. Can you tell how my eyes and my nose is just getting redder as this goes on? We read The Last Kingdom. This is my friend bought me in Waterstones once when we were there. It's a historical fiction. So this obviously isn't fantasy or romance, which is my normal go-tos. However, I do love a historical fiction because I love history. The Last Kingdom is sort of Viking era, although it's not really about Vikings. It's more about Danes, the Danes coming over to England, and about King Alfred. I saw the series on Netflix, really enjoyed the series on Netflix, and that's why my friend bought me the book. Now, what the difference is, on Netflix, understandably, there was obviously a lot more action, and so that's why I enjoyed the series, I would say, more than this book. This book was fairly short. It's only 300 pages. It's quite short, but it is a long series. There's like 10 books in the series. This is basically talking. So you have Uhtred, the main character. It's basically his thoughts, and most of it is him talking and recollecting stuff, but not actually anything happening. There wasn't many fight scenes, and when there were, they weren't, I don't know, I just didn't enjoy them. It felt a lot of times of him going, oh, this happened, this person said this, and then this happened. And it's kind of like, okay, well, do we get to see any of those things? It just kind of felt more like reading his diary. Which I think if you like historical politics and you like the politics of that time, you will really like this book. And again, it's not badly written. It's incredibly well written and researched, actually. It's probably the most well written book that I've read this month, to be honest. But I just wasn't interested in the politics as much. I wanted the action. I wanted the romances that Uhtred has with all the women throughout the series. He has romances with different women, and I like to see the strong women. I wanted to see more of the women characters, and you don't really get any insight into them at all, really, throughout these, which, you know, I wanted. And a lot of it was just sort of going past tense, this happened. I was expecting it to be more deep into the action, or something like that, and to be a bit more emotional. With Uhtred, yeah, he was not exactly an emotional guy, so it's kind of hard to connect to his character. The only reason I could connect to his character is because I've seen the series. He is likeable in the series. I would actually say he's more likeable in the book, but that's because you can obviously see all of his inner thoughts, where obviously in the Netflix series you don't see any of his inner thoughts. So I don't dislike it as a book. I don't think it's suited to me. I don't think it's my type of book. I think if I am reading a historical fiction, it tended to be normally, when I have before, be like a Tudor fiction, and there's not a crazy amount of politics. It's more of a historical romance with some politics and stuff like that on the side. This was very much, I mean, there's no romance at all, and I knew there wouldn't be, but still, I think I've basically learned that when it comes to that certain genre of historical fiction, I know what I now like and dislike. But if that's something that interests you, I think you'll really enjoy it, because it clearly is well written and a really good looking series. So I probably rated it like 3 stars, to be honest, because I read it so quickly. I kind of ended up just flicking through it because I got a bit bored. But I can see very much how people would rate it 5. I can see how it's likeable. Last couple books I read that I literally finished yesterday was Love at First Night. Look at this sprayed edge, cute. This is essentially a kitschy contemporary romance set in the Tower of London with these two people who are in night school. Now, one thing I find really funny about this is it's an enemies to lovers. You can't have an enemies to lovers in a contemporary romance, okay? You don't have romance, you don't have enemies in contemporary life. It's not a thing. You could have rivals to lovers, sure. Disliked people to lovers, sure. Frenemies to lovers, sure. But there's no one, unless you are a political high figure, there is no one really that is an enemy to you, like the average person. It's just not. It makes more sense in either a political setting or a fantasy setting where there is, politics, you know, like where there is death imminent, whether there was no threat of death or anything from these people. Like, it was more rivals to lovers, but whatever. It was cute, it was kitschy, it was fun, it wasn't groundbreaking, it wasn't the most amazing thing in the world, but it's not gonna be. Like, it's fine, it was fun, I enjoyed it. I probably would reread it at some point. She has other books in that sort of series that are standalones, but the same sort of London themed books, and I'm not gonna read them. I mainly read this one because I love the Tower of London. But it was written fairly well. It was quite funny and, again, lighthearted. I didn't really care about the couple that much. My favourite bits, to be honest, were her describing the Tower of London life and the sort of geeky and nerdy things that the female main character would get up to. I love that she was a nerd, because aren't we all? Like, if you're watching this, you probably love books. I'm a big geek about books, let's be real. And I loved that element. She was very easy to relate to. So yeah, it was probably a 2 to 3 stars. It wasn't anything crazy, but it wasn't bad. It was fun. And then finally, I read The Magic Study. This is the second book in the series by Moravia Snyder. The first book was Poison Study. The first book, Poison Study, I read a couple months ago, and I loved it, okay? It was nearly 5 stars. Amazing fantasy book. It's kind of similar to Throne of Glass, although it was written before Throne of Glass. It's kind of like one of the original fantasy books. Essentially, a woman becomes the food taster to test for poison for the commander, so that she doesn't get sentenced to death for killing someone. The premise of the first book, and it was really well done, and the male main character of the first book was great as well. He was really likeable, he was attractive, he was just amazing. In the second book, the couple don't really reunite until about 2/3 through, which made me die. I was just waiting for the male main character to come back. And when they do reunite, it's not for very long. It's like they meet for about a day or something, and then he goes away, and then they come back again for a day, and it just wasn't very satisfying, you know? I wanted a sort of satisfying reunion, and it just didn't really come. And I would say that most of the book was politics. It was, again, less doing, much more talking. It was essentially them just speaking about, this is what happened, this is what's going to happen, help. You know, like not a lot of action actually happened. It was more just chats. But I didn't dislike it. I liked the characters, so it was quite interesting to listen to their chats, and I was interested in the world because of how well it was built in the first book, so I was interested in the politics. But yeah, I look back at it and I'm like, what actually happened? I don't really know. So I shan't be continuing the series, simply because I don't really care about what happens next. I mean, maybe at some point, but I'm not in a rush. I mean, I really wasn't in a rush to pick up the second one, to be honest, because I read the first one a couple months ago. But it definitely was not as good as the first one. The first one had a clear plot line, and the second one just felt very fillery. I mean, maybe the third one gets back into the action, I'm not sure, which is why I'm partly, you know, thinking I'm not going to completely forget about it, but I'm not in a rush at all. I think I just end up rereading the first one if I want to. Okay, I really should not have filmed this video while I'm sick. I feel rough and I look rough. But it needed to be done. That's the thing with these monthly roundups. They need to be done at the end of the month when all the books are fresh in my mind, and then they need to go up fairly soon afterwards. So it has to be done. It was very fun though. I'm now probably going to nap for about 5 hours though, I can't lie. I am absolutely shattered and I need to take my makeup off. I literally put it on just for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Like I said before, if you want to join my book club, please do. The link is below. It's completely free and we can chat about books. You can chat to me about anything really. I don't really care. I'll definitely talk about it. Let me know if you've read any of these books or what books you read this month. I'd love to know. I also want to add some more books to my TBR because obviously each month, as I read like 20 books each month, I need like 20 extra books to add to my TBR, else I'm going to run out. So I'm always looking for new recommendations. Thank you so much for watching. I pretty much post every day on my other socials as well, so please check that out and I will see you very soon. Thank you. Bye.